A complete stranger walks into town with nothing but a backpack and a confident smile. 10 years later, hundreds of people have handed over their life savings. Families have been torn apart. Some followers would even die for him. How does that happen? How does one person gain that much power over the minds of others? And perhaps the more disturbing question, could you recognize the warning signs before it was too late? I'm Detective Cipher from the Classified Mind, and today we're investigating the most disturbing case of all, the human mind itself. When investigators examine cult leaders throughout history, they find something strange. Different countries, different beliefs, different time periods. Yet the same psychological fingerprints appear again and again. Let's examine the evidence. Case file number 1. Extreme narcissism. At first glance, many cult leaders seem incredibly confident. They always have an answer, they always have a solution, and they always seem absolutely certain they're right. But here's where the case takes a dark turn. Psychologists have found that many cult leaders aren't just confident. They genuinely believe they're special, chosen, or superior to everyone else. In fact, investigators often saw this trait in notorious cult leaders like Jim Jones, who convinced followers he alone could save them, and David Koresh, who claimed he had a unique divine purpose. Different leaders, different beliefs, same conviction that they were somehow chosen above everyone else. Imagine meeting someone who never doubts themselves, ever. At first, that confidence can feel comforting, but over time it becomes dangerous. Because if someone believes they're always right, they eventually stop listening to anyone else. And when people stop questioning themselves, they often start expecting others to stop questioning them too. But narcissism alone isn't enough to build a cult. The next clue is far more dangerous. Case file number 2. Master manipulation. Imagine you just moved to a new city. You don't know anyone, you're lonely. Then suddenly a group welcomes you with open arms. Everyone is kind, everyone compliments you, everyone makes you feel important, it feels amazing. And that's exactly why it works. Many cult leaders begin by overwhelming people with attention, affection, and acceptance. Psychologists call this love bombing. But here's the terrifying part. The kindness isn't always the goal. The attachment is. Once trust is established, influence becomes much easier. Most people think manipulation looks obvious. It usually doesn't. It often looks like friendship. Consider Keith Raniere, the leader of NXIVM. He didn't recruit followers with threats. He attracted them with promises of self-improvement, success, and belonging. That's what makes manipulation so effective. It rarely feels dangerous in the beginning, and that's why so many people never see it coming. Case file number 3. An obsession with control. Once followers trust the leader, something interesting happens. The rules begin to change. Maybe questioning becomes discouraged. Maybe certain friendships are suddenly considered dangerous. Maybe outside information becomes untrustworthy. Little by little, control increases. And here's something most people don't realize. People rarely notice when freedom disappears one small piece at a time. It's like being trapped in a room where the walls move inward 1 inch every day. You don't notice it at first, until one day you can't move. But the evidence reveals an even darker tactic hiding beneath the surface. Before we continue, do you think you recognize these warning signs in real life, or would they seem harmless at first? Let me know in the comments, because our next clue explains why followers often defend cult leaders even when the evidence is staring them in the face. Case file number 4. Us versus them thinking. One of the most powerful weapons a cult leader can create is an enemy. Sometimes it's the government, sometimes it's the media, sometimes it's former members, sometimes it's your own family. The specific enemy doesn't matter, the fear does. Charles Manson used this tactic constantly. He convinced followers that outsiders could never understand them and that only the group possessed the truth. The more isolated they became, the more dependent they became on him. Because once people become afraid, they stop asking questions. The world becomes divided into 2 groups, us and them. Good and evil, safe and dangerous. The evidence shows that this kind of black and white thinking makes people easier to control. Because if everyone outside the group is the enemy, where can followers go? The answer is nowhere, which is exactly what makes the final psychological fingerprint so chilling. Case file number 5. Complete lack of accountability. When predictions fail, when promises collapse, when people get hurt, most leaders would accept responsibility. Cult leaders often do the opposite. They blame someone else. The followers didn't believe enough. They didn't try hard enough. They weren't loyal enough. The goalposts constantly move, and somehow the leader is never at fault. Here's what's truly disturbing. Many followers begin blaming themselves instead. The evidence shows this cycle can continue for years because admitting the truth becomes emotionally painful. After investing time, money, relationships, and trust, accepting you've been manipulated can feel impossible. So the cycle continues. When we put all the evidence together, the pattern becomes clear. Extreme narcissism creates the belief. Manipulation attracts followers. Control keeps them trapped. Us versus them thinking isolates them. And a lack of accountability protects the leader. These aren't random personality traits. They're psychological fingerprints. And they appear in case after case after case. But perhaps the most important lesson from today's investigation isn't about cult leaders at all. It's about recognizing manipulation wherever it appears. Because the next person trying to control your thoughts may never call themselves a cult leader. Don't let the next case go cold. Subscribe and ring the evidence bell. The file is closed, but the investigation never ends. Until next time, keep your eyes on the evidence and your mind on the motive. Detective Cipher signing off.